All right, we'll make a start then. Well, thank you very much for waiting till the very end for my session. I really appreciate it, honestly. There's about 3,000% more people here now than there was this time in 2019. So somehow I'm the anchor again. Just a note for next time. Anyway, big thank you to our sponsors who are no longer here, but big thank you to them. No, but seriously, thank you to the sponsors for putting all this event on and supporting the community. For me, it's more personal as well because of what I do in the UK. So this session is just going to be about the next migration that we're going to face in our careers from a voice perspective. And we're just going to talk to you just about how I see the landscape for the next couple of years and where the opportunities may lie. So about me, if you don't know me, I've been an MVP since 2016. I've been in the Microsoft UC space for the last 10 years. Did a Skype blog, got a lot of friends in the audience that I've made by helping the community. And I also organised the Aldi version of Comms v Next in the UK called Commsverse. So if you are in the UK in June this year, we have an equivalent for the European event. So I might have taken inspiration from the name of Comms v Next for my event. So there we are. Going to start with this number. Anybody know what that number is? 166,000? Nope. No, this will, in the sentiment of Ted Colton and the industry that we're going through, that's the number of people that were laid off in our industry in the Q1 this year alone across technology. That's more than 2022 altogether. And when we look at the brands that we recognize, that's quite a crash in our little sector. But why is it happening? I don't pretend to be an economics expert or know the reasons, but I can summarize that we've had COVID for 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. There was a big boom, rapid development, and it's starting to peter off. So customers have already purchased what they're going to purchase. They're locked into contracts, and therefore we can't find new customers as quickly as we can do, so we can't scale with the people that we've taken on board. Could it be that we're actually now looking at smaller features that make a smaller difference rather than large impact features? Teams was a big impact back in 2016. Now it's more about small iterative features, but is that really starting to make traction in the market? We can already see companies trying to position new technology and just trying to see what's going to coin the phrase of my boss, move the needle. You've seen it with Microsoft, with AltSpace VR, tried the metaverse and what have you, but that seems to have taken a back step now in favor of Copilot, which is going to be the next big thing, hopefully. But this is all going to lead to collapses. They're just the banks that have been in trouble, right? So it's a really worrying time for us as an organisation, well, as a IT people. You know, we've got Avaya with Chapter 11 again and what have you. But this creates a problem for our customers and our organisations that we potentially could be victims of, if not now, in the future. And this is just a symptom of the next dot-com boom that's gone bust, right? So it's a challenging time. It's going to be a rough couple of years. And it's going to prompt a few things. And customers are going to be impacted by the technology consolidation with when the market contracts. It's going to be mergers, acquisitions for companies to stay alive. It's also the cost of resources now because Azure isn't cheap to run. You know, cost of living has gone up, so there's more pressure on employers to give bigger pay rises. more cost to tech because Teams has been largely given away for free for the last 4 years, and now we need to monetize it to actually pay for the development. And all that's going to pinch the customer. And the customer is going to start to look at what they have from a technology perspective and see where we can make savings. And it will always be savings with employees before in savings in technology. And we've probably got into the perfect storm moment of the new COVID and the rapid adoption. And now we're looking at how do we actually still progress or make progress in IT, but also in a very, very tight market. And this will lead, one way or another, to your next voice migration, whether that's going to be intra-company or into cloud. And whether that's this year or in a few years, you'll face this challenge. The first challenge, well, if anyone, the UK people will know what that is. So in Gloucester, there is a cheese rolling competition where nutcases all run down a big steep hill chasing a roll of cheese, break some bones and what have you. But this essentially is the race to the bottom of the mountain from an operator perspective. We think about Operator Connect and we think about all the carriers that are involved in there. You know, there's a lot, combined with a downturn in voice, so we're looking at more into artificial intelligence or asynchronous communication. There's going to be a lot of disruption within the telecom market in the next 12, 18 months as people try to, or operators try to still provide value and still stay alive. So, and this is going to drive people to look at other vendors. So it used to be a case of once an operator is in with a company, it's very hard to move. With cloud telephony, it's very easy to move these days. So anybody who's sitting back thinking that actually I've got the dial tone, the customer won't move, they will move now because it's a lot easier to move. So it's going to create a more competitive market. But also combined with the costs of the enterprise, finance is going to start to decide what is a good deal and put pressure on IT to find solutions that actually will save money and provide tangible value rather than just perceived value, because we could all get a bit goggly-eyed about a new thing and how it can potentially transform our workspace, but can we actually say for sure that that's actually going to provide value? Do we need phone numbers for every user in the business? Probably not. You know, and is the current service provider providing us the value that we need at the price point that we're willing to pay? And the answer is probably going to be a mixture of the two questions. But the enterprise will first rationalize their phone service and provision their workers with different or alternative communication, whether that's just Teams meetings or what have you, to realize short-term savings that will lead to long-term savings. And as soon as service contracts come to an end, that's where operators are going to start to see their business suffer. But then if you're still with that operator and they're going to go through a merger or acquisition, you're going to be affected, and then it's going to prompt you a question of whether you stick with that provider or whether you move. So moving operators within teams is different, depends on what your current technology is. So the first scenario is if you have direct routing and you're going from direct routing provider A to B. And this is direct routing as a service. So if you've bought into this in the past, you probably don't have an SPC that you own. You probably use it as use a vendor. But it's probably a fairly trivial move from one provider to another these days. It's just essentially a supporting exercise and a little bit of a deployment for you. Don't require any user configuration as we do with other migrations in the team space. But people shouldn't be really worried about moving providers with teams if you've got direct routing as a service, for instance. It's not really a project. To do anything, you don't have to recreate caller queues or attendance, or you don't have to unassign numbers and reassign them or what have you. It's just literally plumb in the new direct routing provider, change your voice policy, and away you go. There are a few gotchas with, where's my mouse gone? Oh, Mac needs a screen. There we go. So there are a few gotchas with moving this. Depending on the provider that you have, if they've got automated scripts for destroy as well as provision, you could find yourself that they've completely removed your voice routing policies, removed your dial plans, and all of a sudden you have no voice. And the new provider doesn't provide that, and you've got to go and do some PowerShell really quickly to assign them. But if you want my tip on this, find out if they do have a destroy, and if they don't, then basically add your new provider to your existing voice routing policy so that when the porting happens, it's completely transparent to the user. And then you can just remove the old provider once the port's gone through. That usually works quite well. And then you can rename the policy if you want to rename it in the future. The second one is direct routing to Operator Connect, and I think there was a session, was it yesterday, on the migration from DR to Operator Connect. There's kind of three main reasons why you'd want to move away from direct routing to Operator Connect. It gives you improved management inside the Teams admin center, so the main differentiator is that your numbers now will show in the Teams admin center, whereas direct routing, you have to create your own number management solution, whether that's Excel or another product. You also don't need any voice routing policies as well. It's pretty much comparable with the calling plans. So it means that the moves actually changes a little bit more simpler in your business than with direct routing. It's just less moving parts. But also, the program is designed to offer you the best-in-class network and hardware interop between Microsoft and that operator. I remember calling out a few questionable direct routing as a service providers a couple of years ago and getting a call from Microsoft saying, what would you do about it? And I said, well, maybe I'd have a program that certified carriers. And so I'm taking complete credit for Operator Connect. So, yeah, that's it, you know. Say? Yeah, you can do. I think it was him I had a call with, actually. So with operators, you get end-to-end quality of service between Microsoft, so your last mile, as well as the transit between Microsoft and the operator as well. But most importantly, and the most value to an Operator Connect model versus direct routing is that your support is a bit more simplified. So traditionally, you would, in a DR scenario, the customer would be in the middle of support, so you'd have to manage the support with Microsoft for your teams. If you had a problem with the voice, Microsoft support, but also you would have to facilitate the ticket with your voice provider as well, and you might not have the skills or knowledge to tie those two together to understand where the problem lies. So, you know, if you're in an outage scenario, that could take you several hours and days or what have you to return outage while you're trying to manage tickets and different opinions or what have you. But with operators, your support is with Microsoft, and they will then, and between them and the operators, help you out. There is some, brain's gone out. So there is some gotchas with operators if you're moving from direct routing to Operator Connect, is that if you have numbers assigned to your users, you must first unassign them all before you move your numbers over to the operator from direct routing, because it's a different assignment process. And then the operator will make sure that those numbers appear in your Teams admin center, and as soon as they appear in your Teams admin center, you've got to go and reassign all those to all your users, all your call queues, auto attendants, and what have you. So a big tip, make sure you have a backup. And if you're not using emergency locations, then you need to be. If you don't know what emergency locations are, you need to be in the other session that's going on right now. But essentially, it's a bit more heavy-handed at the point of moving from direct routing to Operator Connect. It would be nice if we didn't have to unassign numbers, for instance, and there was some intelligence there to take over, but we do. The second reason is that the driving factor that could challenge your next voice migration. It's going to be that your operational needs are going to change. So what we have 2 years ago or now is not going to be what we're going to need from a business requirements perspective in maybe 2 or 3 years. If you consider when Teams was released in 2018, was it? Something like that, 17? 5 years ago, something now, isn't it? But if you look at the market and how we communicated back then, voice was a major part of every business communication tool. And now, 2023, it's a second-class citizen tool, really. Customers that I'm speaking to, they're in the region of 30, 40,000 users. Only 10% have voice, and they tell me that that's just going to decline even further over the next 12 months. So that's what we're seeing in Europe. Whether that is the case in the US, I don't know, but we've seen definitely the start of the downward curve in voice. And this is going to lead to the question of value. For the people who need voice, how can we identify products and services that are actually going to provide value to us beyond just dial tone? And that's going to lead to us having to do an optimization exercise within the business. And it could just be a case of we have bought what we've always bought. We've gone to a provider and we've said, we've got 1,000 users who need voice. I want to sign a contract for 1,000 channels for the next 3 years to get the best price, or whatever it might be. But with the commercial challenges that we've got going on in the market, finance are going to start looking at, do we need those 1,000 channels or whatever it might be, and when's that opportunity to optimize? So optimizing the enterprise. So big optimization, if you've gone into calling plans early, it could be that the big wins from a calling plan perspective is that it's black box solution, single vendor, you pay for your license and everything's with Microsoft, but it also comes with a challenge of, do you actually need to use all those minutes that you have, all those licenses and what have you? Potentially no, so you might get a better deal with an operator, or you might get a better deal between operators as well, because that's a market that's just going to expand and grow, and I probably reckon there's going to be at least 100 to 150 vendors on Operator Connect in the next 12, 18 months, I reckon. It's just going to blow up. There's already 60 nearly, so it's only going to increase, and the Teams Phone Mobile piece, that's only going to increase that store. So it's how do we differentiate? Are we getting the best deal? What's the provider giving, or what's the operator giving us that other operators aren't? Where can we save money, or where can we have the value from? Why would you want to move from calling plans to Operator Connect? Obviously, Teams Phone Mobile is probably going to be the biggest mover in the next couple of years. That's I think from the independent analysts, they're saying that that's going to boost the Teams voice adoption by about 11%. And the fixed line market is going to go south. So Teams Phone Mobile is going to be a thing. But also you might be moving from calling plans or from operators just from a coverage perspective. So maybe you've taken on a new office and you want a single vendor that's providing dial tone and voice services across all your estate. So when you move from calling plans to operator, it is considered a port. So there is probably the most disruptive migration that you can do. And again, make sure you have a backup of your numbers, because you'll have to unassign all those numbers before you do the port across to another operator, even though both of them are Operator Connect partners. And even though the numbers are in the tenant, they will actually get deprovisioned and then reprovisioned by your new provider after port as well. So if you want a tip, create a PowerShell script that's just going to iterate through your backup so that when the numbers appear, you can start to reassign the numbers automatically. Why is it a disruptive service? It can take up to 24 hours for a Teams client to recognize a change. So even if you've deprovisioned a number, the dial pad will disappear, and if you reprovision the number back to the user, it can take a while for the cache to reload, and there is a script available online that will help you clear that, maybe on my blog, that, that can help speed that up. But it is considered a porting exercise. It is the most disruptive one that I've ever encountered. I've not had a good experience with a calling plan or operator to operate a port yet. From a customer perspective, it's a bit clunky. But as long as you plan for it, then you should be okay. And communication with the business is essential because they're going to need to know what they're in for really when this happens. When you move from calling plans to Operator Connect, you will probably not tee up the port for the last day of your calling plan license. It'll probably happen way ahead of time. And anybody who's going to leave it to the last moment before your license expires is asking for trouble. So you'll end up for a short time paying for two services, essentially. Calling plans to Operator Connect direct routing is a crazy scenario, I know, but why would you want to do that? And that really comes down to your requirements. If your business requirements have changed, that you've introduced more complexity into your environment, that maybe calling plans or Operator Connect is just giving you not enough. You've introduced a contact center, you want to unify your services, or maybe you've bought a new company or merged with another company who has another system. It could be Zoom, it could be WebEx or Call Manager, what have you. All of a sudden, you've got to join those services together or those phone systems together. And Operator Connect might not be the actual solution, best solution for that, maybe. But it is a scenario that you could do. But the main reason is it gives you the ultimate flexibility to do what you want with your voice and your dial tone and how you want to integrate it with what you have beyond just Teams. It will be a very niche scenario, but perhaps, like I say, through acquisitions and mergers that you might have to do this, and maybe Teams is too expensive and you want to move. It's an option, but I'm not supposed to say that, being an MVP and what have you. But there are lots of gotchas from this, so all your moves as changes of what processes are going to change. The flavor of direct routing that you have is not always what you think it has. But even though it might give you some savings, you've got to consider that the support overhead that you'll take on with direct routing is going to be much, much more than what you'll have with Operator Connect or calling plans. So it's going to be very much a strategic decision, more in a larger organization than a smaller one. So if you're ever on this, the flexibility is that because Operator Connect and calling plans don't use the voice routing policies, you can actually set this up way ahead of time for a user so that the switch is actually quite smooth. The third scenario is that you acquire another company I touched on, and this is going to affect everyone, really. It's just a matter of time. Even though the operator market is going to be pinched first, at some point we're all going to feel the pinch, and we're going to have to make a decision or a business decision whether we acquire to obtain our customers and keep our investors happy and what have you, or we become purchasable by other companies. And then it's how do we plan for a merger event? There are three challenges rather, that are going to await us in this scenario. So the first question is, how do we get everyone to work together as a team. I might have, if Contoso, for instance, buys Tailwind, how do we maintain the communication between those two business units that were once separate? How do we join them together? Sure, if companies use Teams, we can use peer-to-peer calling and federation and what have you, but what happens if Contoso uses Teams, but Tailwind uses Avaya or Slack or Zoom or what have you? How do we integrate with those? Or how do we integrate businesses together so that we can take advantage of our new partnership or what have you? When departments consolidate as well, usually for a good few months it's status quo after an acquisition, but departments are going to start to merge together. And it's how we bring those people together. So in the acquired state, we have two organizations, Contoso and Tailwind, and we'll just focus on the teams-to-teams migration, as it were. We have two different tenants, all using Teams. Contoso might be using calling plans for their phone system. Tailwind might be using Operate Connect. It might also have a Cisco system or a PBX or whatever it might be, another platform that they use. And then it's how do we start to consolidate and make some savings. And during this time, it's pretty independent. They're all islands, as it were. So using this example, for instance, we can go into a coexistence state and we can identify some easy wins that we can get these companies talking together. The first one is we can set up federation between teams. That's pretty easy to do. If it's closed federation, it's just adding a domain into your tenant to do the communication. But then we can also identify, well, what happens if I get to a scenario where Contoso want to start to take some customer service calls from a contact center from that Tailwind are using. And if that contact center uses, will use SIP and what have you, you can leverage the direct routing capabilities within Teams to create a SIP trunk to that contact center in Tailwind, and then have remote agents from Contoso helping in the support for Tailwind without really having to do any data migration, any email migration, or what have you. These are just quick wins that you can do to start to integrate quickly without having to plan or while you're planning a more tighter merger. The next bit is, well, how do I've got the teams-to-teams communication sorted, but we can identify Tailwind's got a call manager here with some users and services on that the Contoso users still need to call, and vice versa. So keeping the scenario simple, if it's a call manager, that's a certified gateway. We can set up direct routing between the Contoso tenant and Tailwind to bring that communication in. Then you can start planning your merger. So voice is always the last thing you think about in a tenant-to-tenant migration. It's always identity, email, data, and then what about voice? We can't move without identity. We can't move without data these days because of SharePoint reliance on Teams. We can't move without email. So voice will always come last on this one. There are tools out there to help with that identity migration, but what I want to try and do is keep it as simple as possible. So if I am going from tenant A, from Tailwind to Contoso, using direct routing, Contoso could be using calling plans. And like I say, we can move the user identity across, give them a new domain, UPN name in the Contoso space, and because they're using direct routing, we can create a SIP trunk from the Contoso tenant to the SBC or the direct routing provider that Tailwind are using from the Contoso tenant, just to get the user identity across and get the phone number. We can move them from direct routing to calling plans in the future. And how you migrate these users are going to depend on what department they're in, what their sorry, just give me a sec. So the considerations to take on board when you're doing this is that because the new identity in the Contoso tenant will be created with the Contoso domain, is that you can start assigning the DDIs ahead of time inside the Contoso tenant before moving the user across. And then when you move the users across, make sure that you're moving all the dependent users across as well. So if they're in a call queue, all agents have to move at the same time. Team call groups, etc. All the dependent members have to move at the same time. You can't have different agents and different tenants. If you're moving from Operator Connect, so Tailwind has an Operator Connect PSTN connection, but Contoso uses calling plans, for instance. How do we get people over to Contoso? You can talk to the operator and say, well, actually, there's no reason why Contoso can't go to the same operator to say, hey, I want a service, plug it into my tenant, and I want to move the users across. Yes, there will be technically a number port, and you can move them to your final state post-migration if you want to. But just be careful when you're talking to the operators, because it will be a different service. You will be paying for that unless they come up with a migration package that you can buy from them. But it's just to make sure that you will be potentially paying for two services at the same time, and depending on what the operator supports, you might have to do a big bang migration rather than a per number or block of number migration or what have you. So it's more in the planning of this than anything else, but it is possible. Scenario 3, we're going to go to calling plans. So Contoso and Tailwind both use Microsoft for calling plans. Can you see a potential problem here? What's that? Yeah. Yes. Anything else? You're going to pay double. You're going to pay double. So Tailwind, I've got 100 calling plans or 1,000 calling plans. I want to move them to Contoso. Contoso's got by 1,000 calling plans, but I'm now paying for 2,000 calling plans until that one expires. There is no license migration possibility. So in an acquisition, when you want to move users across into one tenant and you want to give them a calling plan number, and they've already got calling plans, you're going to have to pay for Tailwind until that contract expires, and also uplift your home tenant by the same amount of calling plans. Take that feedback back. You Microsoft, you are just Microsoft. But yes, you also have to unassign all the numbers and what have you. The numbers will disappear when they do the PTN service desk migration request. It's technically not a port, so it does happen really quite efficiently, but you do have to go and do your PowerShell and unassign and all the location stuff that the lady mentioned as well. It's a pain in the butt, but it's possible. But at least you can do per number or per block of numbers rather than doing a big bang. So you can do that. But this is what's going to trigger. The question is that person or those users worth a phone number? Are there alternatives out there? Do we just give them this? Everyone's got this. It's unlimited calling packages. Are we going to see a return of the BYOD, sorry, the company mobile phone and what have you? Probably. But definitely voice itself is going to find itself more in a niche in a niche market rather than just widespread like we've been used to. So final thoughts really, because we all want to go home, I guess, and I don't really want to be speaking for more any longer, but voice migrations of the future are going to be inevitable, and I was one who said in 2018 that moving from Skype or whatever to Teams will be the last voice migration that you'll ever do, and that might be true at scale, but there's going to be lots of factors that are going to land in your lap that are going to challenge that statement. It's going to start with optimizations, whether it's your company that is going to look at optimizations, how it can save money or how it can extract more value out of its services it consumes, or look to make savings where possible. And from an operator perspective or a service provider, because there are a lot of us, it's going to be ones that will provide the most value to customers that the ones that you're going to want to move to. Those who just rely on selling channels or selling minutes, and that's all they do, they're the ones that are going to find themselves in trouble because customers want as much value for their dollar as they can get. So it's going to be, in my opinion, I could be wrong, it's going to be a challenging couple of years for all of us in the voice space, but like everything in IT, it'll go full circle. And with that, do you have any questions? Please say one so I can throw this at someone. Hey?
Work. Oh, there it is. It's all doom and gloom. It's the.
Well, I wanted to end it on a positive note.
I don't know that there is one, but I'm just saying to end the session with. Yeah. It's more of a comment than a question.
Well, with every challenge, there's always opportunity, right? So, and it's going to look the innovation that we're going to see in the market while we try and find a new place. That's going to start turning our heads. We've already seen it with the ChatGPT stuff that Rich and Eric's done. It gives you some answers, but you still need to work out how you're going to make actual use of those features and that technology. So it might not be a case of, voice is going to be the only thing that we do. It's how we improve the communication, get people to work better. And that's what any vendor's got to look at from a service and proposition, is how do we adapt to the future, and how do we actually provide the value to the customers, to get their return on their money. And no questions, no further questions, thank you.
Fine.
What's your question?
Just saying, how do you feel all this stuff relates to what Tom was talking about earlier about Teams phone on mobile and that integration?
Yeah, I see definite traction there. I wasn't in Tom's session, but it's a natural evolution. Like fixed line is going to be a challenging market. It's going to be customer services centric, fixed line, but from like sales and frontline workers, mobile is going to be the key thing. If we can integrate SMS within Teams as well, so you've got the full communication, that would be good. But look at, if you've got family, young kids, or even teenage kids, when was the last time they used their iPhone to make a phone call? It's all WhatsApp or Snapchat or Instagram. It's all asynchronous comms. So it's been able to integrate all the new way of communicating it into business apps. And sadly, people don't like to talk anymore. So that's why BT going out of business. Why, what's your opinion?
Will be interesting to see if it takes any money away from sort of calling plans and things like that,
Yeah.
since it's that mobile number that now becomes my number for Teams.
That's it. And not relying on 4G to take a phone call is a big thing, right? Because the main objection to simultaneous ring and what have you on Teams has been like, well, as an employee, I pay for my mobile. I've got my data plan, which is probably a couple of gig worth of data, and now I've got to use that data bandwidth for my phone call. Don't like it. But as soon as you give them a GSM call, it's fine. You know, and the company's paying for the eSIM or the second SIM or what have you, that objection goes away, and people will, you know, we have this in the hand probably 18 hours a day, and that's your primary device. So being able to communicate on that in any way you want just makes sense. It's how do you compete with that? You can't. I'm looking at Brian. Any other questions? Great, we can all go to the bar now. Thanks very much.